Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion, and today I've got player Fleshy Boys who has requested me to turn in a set of the Price of Loyalty My New Divination card, and I am going to do that for him. It's his card, so his set, and we're going to see what we get. Turning in a set of 4 of these. I think he's traded for about an Exalt for them. So we've got triple blue, double green, single red. Those are pretty solid colours, and plus 2 to socketed Curse Gems. It's not a hard hit, but it's not terrible either. So I'm going to give that back to him, and you'll notice I got the turn-in divination cards there. So that's mediocre, I think. And I think Bane with Empower might be the way that he needs to get that to go. It's not Uber, but has uses. Anyways, that's all I got for this one. Hope you have a good one. Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Now you may have seen the video that I've got currently up on the screen at the moment, which is my Cobralash Poison Assassin. I wanted to talk how you would adapt this build if you wanted to use the skill Venom Gaia instead. Now Venom Gaia is one of the other new poison oriented skills that's been added to the Blight League. Venom Gaia is a little bit different mechanically. Where Cobralash has Chain implicitly in it, as well as 40% chance to hit, 50% physical conversion to Chaos, lots of added Chaos, and lots of base damage. Venom Gaia relies upon hitting more than once. It has even more added attack Chaos damage than Cobralash does, but it has lower base damage. So you'll see that it's got 103.7% as opposed to the 125.4% that is present on the Cobralash skill. Venom Gaia partially makes up for this by having the projectiles return to you. When they're returning, they deal 75% less damage, and they pierce all targets, and they get stored up around you and can be fired off for up to 12 seconds when you use Whirling Blades. So the idea with using Venom Gaia is that you run through the map. When you're fighting packs of trivial monsters, you throw Venom Gaia at them. Ideally, you'll be using Fork support, and so you hit lots of them. Those projectiles, when they're exhausted, they then fly back to you, and at that point you catch them. And then when you come across a rare monster that's particularly tanky, or a rogue exile or something like that, and you need some burst damage, you use Whirling Blades from point blank range, and your Whirling Blades disgorges all of the caught Venom Gaia blades that you've got around you, and does massive damage, in theory at least, to the big tanky target. So, the poison chance on hit is still there, 40%. You've still got 50% physical to chaos conversion. So for that reason, the core damage mechanics remain the same. You don't really need to scale damage in any different ways. However, it becomes even more important that when you bring, and I'll bring up Path of Building to demonstrate exactly what we're talking about here, it becomes even more important that you scale your poison duration through Noxious Strike. So Noxious Strike means you're even more locked into the Assassin. There's a lot of talk with the Cobralash version of this build that people think that the Deadeye is perhaps even a better choice of Ascendancy than the Assassin, and if not, at least it's going to be competitive. However, I feel that the Venom Gaia version absolutely relies upon Noxious Strike in a way that the Cobralash version doesn't. That's because you can conceivably fly through Whirling Blades through a monster, perhaps hitting it 15 times on the way through. We'll have to see how that plays out in practice. But let's assume you hit it 15 times. Then once you're on the other side, you can start stacking up your poisons again. The next thing I want to say about using Venom Gaia is that you will absolutely need to be using Fork support. And for that reason, Fork support doesn't become available until Act 4, and so I don't recommend that you use Venom Gaia until that point. The reason being is that Fork support doesn't have much of an impact on the damage the skill does, but it causes 2 projectiles to return instead of 1. If a projectile doesn't have any ability to pierce, doesn't have any ability to chain, then and doesn't have any ability to fork, when it hits an enemy, it will just return straight to you, and you'll lose most of the value that you get from the line, which I will just quickly bring up. you will lose most of the value that you get from the lines, projectiles return to you dealing 75% less damage and piercing all targets. So you don't want them to become exhausted quickly. And what you want to do is to have them fork so that then they come back to you and they're going to potentially be in line to hit you to hit the enemy again on the way back. They deal 75% less damage, but it stacks up an extra poison for the purposes of Noxious Strike, and this also, I believe, will make Toxic Delivery an even better choice than it is on the Cobra Lash version. So again, bringing up the Path of Building side of things, Toxic Delivery being here, giving you, it's more the crit side of things, but it causes you to be, to be stacking up so many more crits on an enemy so quickly that you will be getting a lot of crits. And so I think Toxic Delivery becomes mandatory as well on a Venom Gaia based assassin. Otherwise, other than using Venom Gaia and Fork in place of the Cobra Lash skill and one of the support gems, I think you're pretty much flexible to do any setup that works for Cobra Lash should still continue to work. I feel that Cobra Lash is the more powerful of the two skills, but I'm not willing to write off Venom Gaia entirely, and there's so much flexibility to try with one of them, then to swap to the other. So much of the build, the passive tree remains the same, the itemization remains the same, and so fundamentally you can watch the build for Cobra Lash and then just swap 2 gems and be playing a Venom Gaia character. Lastly, there is the option of running Plague Bearer as well. I'm not sold on this skill, but by all means, give it a try and prove me wrong. If you've got any other questions about running Venom Gaia, definitely fire them away in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you found this useful and hope you have a good one. Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile build discussion. Cobra Lash is one of the new skills that's being introduced in the Blight League 3.8 in about 10 hours time, and it's one of the most exciting skills that has been introduced to the game recently, partly because the numbers on it are just so damn good. So let's have a quick look at the Cobra Lash gem itself. Cobra Lash is 50% physical to chaos conversion. It deals 125% of base damage at gem level 20, and has 120% of base attack speed. So multiplying these together, you get 150.48% of base damage. Then on top of that, you've got the effects of effectively a level 16 added chaos damage on an attack that is somewhat ranged and that has intrinsic 5 chains. Then add even more to it, you've got 40% chance to poison on hit, you've got 50% to damage over time multiplier for poison from crits, and you've got 30% increased critical strike chance. Needless to say, this is a skill that looks pretty damn impressive. Now, the Assassin is the ascendancy that screams at me to build around, to be built in conjunction with this skill. The Assassin has synergies with critical strikes, it has synergies with poison, and it is the all-out offense build that I think is designed for this skill. So, having a quick look at the Assassin Ascendancy, I think there's 3 clear choices of Ascendancy nodes that you're definitely going to take. So you're going to take Mistwalker, which is a very powerful defensive node. You're going to take Opportunistic, because immunity to Reflect on critical strikes. Reflect on critical strikes will kill you. It will kill you a lot. This removes that from being a problem, as well as that the node is good on its own merits, even without that second line there. So 20% increased move speed if you've killed recently is phenomenal. And you just think of the difference between 15% move speed boots and 35% move speed boots. It's just totally on a different world. Additionally, one of the most powerful defenses in this game is not getting hit in the first place. Noxious Strike is a no-brainer. We're going to be taking this. 40% chance to poison on hit gets us very easily to the magic 100%. 50% increased damage with poison, but then there's these 2 magic lines: 25% to damage over time multiplier for poison, and 5% increased poison duration for each poison you've inflicted recently. If you're dishing out poisons fast, one of the best ways to scale them is by increasing their duration, and Noxious Strike does that. You're going to get a 4th Ascendancy option as well when you complete the Eternal Labyrinth. I suggest Toxic Delivery, but I don't think it's a clear choice. You're not wrong if you don't take Toxic Delivery, whereas I think you are just objectively wrong if you don't take these 3. All the other choices, Ambush and Assassinate, Unstable Infusion, and Toxic Delivery are all compelling choices, and I'm going to leave that decision up to you, but if you're not sure, default to taking Toxic Delivery. In terms of the passive tree, I will provide another warning here that this build is a little bit light on life. If you're playing in hardcore, then I would suggest that you make a few sacrifices, skip some damage, in order to pick up some of the not so amazing various life node clusters that are around. You've got the Heart of Oak and these clusters here in the start of Ranger. They're an option. You can get to them with, you'll get a little bit under you'll get about 3.5% per life per point invested if you path to there. Alternately, you've got the option of taking the Melding cluster, which is a pretty mediocre cluster, but might just be what you needed. If you're in hardcore, you need to make those decisions. If you're in softcore, then I think you've got enough life to get started. And you'll see that this is set up for a level 80 character at the moment, so there's still 20 more passive tree points to earn. Once you get there, of course, you can pick up some of the extra life nodes, or if you take a bit of an approach of you're willing to die every now and again in order to speed up your clearing, then of course you can take more damage. That's entirely up to you. This tree is set up for level 80 and is set up on the basis that you want to be doing a lot of damage at level 80. So in terms of how you scale poison damage, there is the stat poison damage over time multiplier, which is also chaos damage over time multiplier, or ailment damage over time multiplier. Any of these are one angle of scaling for poison damage. Now, critical strikes give you a lot of sources of additional poison damage over time multiplier. I don't really go into that in this build. I'm not really trying to scale critical strikes. You could certainly modify this if you wanted to do so, but I feel that the build is squishy enough already that I'm a bit hesitant to invest a lot of passive tree points into critical strikes as well. The second axis on which you can scale your poison damage is by increasing chaos damage and poison damage and ailment damage. Most of this is going to come from gear, and we'll come to that later, but stockpile your corroded fossils because you're going to be using a lot of them. Next up, there is poison duration. Poison duration is really strong, and you've got the single best source of it in the game as an assassin, a Noxious Strike. If you have inflicted 30 poisons in the last 4 seconds, then you're getting 150% increased poison duration. If you've got 50% increased poison duration from other sources, then this is essentially doubling your poison duration. And because poison deals a fixed amount of damage per second, an amount of damage per second that's based upon the size of the hit and various other factors, doubling the duration doubles the total amount of damage that poison instance will inflict. So for that reason, poison duration is really good, but you do have quite a bit of it. You also can scale poison by scaling your poison chance, but we're going to very quickly get to 100%, and that is a hard cap. So, in terms of various options for gearing, how are you going to gear this character? In terms of flasks, you're going to want to find a Corralito signature unique flask when you can. This gives you a huge increase to the duration of your poisons. You're also going to find yourself an Atziri's Promise flask, which should be available by day 2 of the league for a modest price. When I say a modest price, I mean maybe you're paying 5 chaos on day 2, maybe you're paying 10. You should be able to afford it on day 2 if you're the sort of person that gets to maps quickly. If not, no drama. By the time you get to maps, the market will be completely flooded with Atziri's Promise flasks. You'll be able to pick one up for an alchemy orb or 2. You'll need at least 1 instant life flask and at least 1 quicksilver, and the rest of your flasks can be to taste, especially until you can pick up Corralito signature. Just go with anything until that point. You must have an anti-bleed flask somewhere, and other immunity flasks are very useful, especially having a flask that provides immunity to curses is really helpful as well. At the moment, I can't really say whether you're going to need a mana flask or not. Ideally, you don't want to be using a mana flask, but you might find that you need to. In terms of your core skill gems, you're going to want to attach Cobra Lash to Greater Multiple Projectiles, to Nightblade Support, to Unbound Ailments, to Deadly Ailments, and to Vile Toxins. Now, you're not going to be able to use all of those while you're leveling, so just use any subset of 4 of them that you can manage. Cobra Lash you'll get really early, the others you'll be able to pick up over time, and so you can then start going from transitioning from a 3-link to a 4-link, which ideally you'll transition to a 4-link about the middle of Act 3. Then from a 4-link you want to transition to a 5-link somewhere in maps, and then from a 5-link to a 6-link probably somewhere about the time that you're getting into red maps. Of course, you may end up picking up Tabula Rasa at some point if you get lucky, and if you do find a Tabula Rasa, fantastic, just go with all 6 gems at that point. For bosses, remove greater multiple projectiles and add poison support, which will be a 39% damage multiplier against bosses. That's assuming that you've got gem level 20 on poison. The 60% chance to poison that is part of poison support is totally wasted, but if we flick over to the gems that have been reworked, then you'll see that poison support has had its numbers increased considerably, and there you can see 39% more damage with poison. That is phenomenal, and that is a really compelling replacement for greater multiple projectiles. In terms of mana reservations, Malevolence will multiply your damage. Val Grace is a solid defense, both Grace as an always-on defensive aura, and then Val Grace as an oh shit, I am surrounded and I am in real trouble emergency button, or alternately as something you can fire off before engaging a boss. Alternately, if you're willing to sacrifice the defense provided by Grace, you can use Blasphemy linked to Despair. Despair is a powerful curse that increases the amount of chaos damage that nearby enemies will take. Additionally, it reduces their chaos resistance, it causes them to take increased damage from damage over time effects, and it adds chaos damage to hits against cursed enemies. All of these are really strong effects. However, be aware that bosses, i.e. the monsters that are likely to require the most hits to kill, will have a degree of resilience against curse effects. And so for that reason, at the times that you need Despair most, it's not going to let you down completely, but it's also not going to be as good as you might have otherwise hoped. I'd still seriously consider using it, and this is going to be something that you'll have to test out yourself to ascertain whether it's better to have the defense provided by Grace, or to have the offensive power provided by a Blasphemy Despair. In terms of utility skills, you're going to want to use Blood Rage. Blood Rage will tremendously increase your attack speed and will provide you with non-stop frenzy charges while you're killing monsters. You're also going to want to have Wither linked to Spell Totem support and linked to faster casting. What this does, this is the classic Wither Totem setup. It will debuff enemies. You're only going to cast this spell when you've got a single target enemy that you think is going to take a lot of hits. Drop down a Wither Totem and it will wither away at your opponent's chaos resistance. You can then start stacking up your poisons on it and get in some really, truly mean damage. You have the option of using a Golem skill. I kind of advise people not to use Golems, mostly because they do provide a genuine defensive or offensive benefit, depending on which one you go with, most of the time, but then in certain circumstances they just surprise you and get you killed. Some ways that your Golems can backfire really badly. When you zone into an incursion, you will often get your Golem will trigger enemies to start attacking it, and then often will end up resulting in you getting killed. Additionally, Golems can also be real trouble on maps where monsters have projectiles that chain. So for that reason, think carefully about using a Golem. You may decide that the benefits are worth the costs. You will definitely, however, need a guard skill, and because we're taking Phase Acrobatics, which is a powerful defensive node over here, and Acrobatics, Acrobatics cripples the amount of armor that you're able to get on your character, and this means that Molten Shell is not a very viable option for your build. That's fine. Although Molten Shell is the strongest of the guard skills, there is nothing wrong with using either Steel Skin or Immortal Call. I suggest that you experiment with both. It comes down to personal preference. Some people like self-casting Steel Skin at level 20. This was what I did during the Legion League. You might prefer to have Steel Skin attached to cast when damage taken, in which case you'll need to balance the level of your cast when damage taken to your own needs. Alternately, you can go with Immortal Call as an alternate form of mitigation. None of these choices are right or wrong, and if you decide to go with a guard skill, definitely link it to increased duration. Next up, we have a 4-link movement skill, Whirling Blades, Link to Fortify, Link to Faster Attacks, and then link to your choice of Culling Strike or Blood Magic. I personally like Culling Strike as a way to just deliver the finishing blow to a tough enemy. However, for poison builds, usually you'll have stacked up enough poison that they're going to die anyway, so Blood Magic, although it will cost you a little bit of life to use the skill, it guarantees that even if you're out of mana for some reason, you can always get away from danger. So make your own decision there. And now we'll talk gearing. Firstly, you want to start with 4-linked rares while leveling. So 4 links become available at monster level 25 from memory, which means that it's either late Act 2 or early Act 3 that you will start seeing them. When you see a 4-link that's in colours that you can use, pick it up, throw an alchemy orb on it if you've got one, or better yet, throw a low level essence on it. Don't worry too much about stats while you're leveling. Once you do get into maps, eventually you'll find something a bit better. Keep with rare items for a while. Don't spend too much on gear that you're just going to quickly outgrow. When you get to endgame, you're going to want to have one of 3 things, in my opinion. The first option is that you can go with Cherubim's Maleficence. This has a powerful mixture of life and chaos damage on it. Potentially as much as 80% increased chaos damage, potentially as much as 100 life. It's a pretty solid item, it's also pretty rare. And I'm expecting a lot of poison builds will want to use this, so as a result, it may not be very available. Next option is Dendrobate. Dendrobate is the all-out offense option. You'll notice here that it provides no life. It provides a few elemental resistances and a little bit of energy shield, but the main things that it does for you, it causes Socketed Gems to be supported by level 10 lesser poison. This adds a little bit of chaos damage, but also increases the mana cost of your primary skill, which will probably be a good trade-off in the end, but it's not as good as it sounds, because you're already at 100% chance to poison. However, 75 to 100% increased damage with poison if you have at least 300 dexterity is great. Up to 25% increased poison duration if you have at least 150 intelligence. This is the all-out offense option. It scales poison damage on 2 different axes, and it adds base chaos. For that reason, it is an excellent offensive choice. Your third choice is to just find a damn nice set of Elder armor and craft it up to have life and defenses on it, and any other utility effects that you can get on it that are useful. I think, in general speaking, the Elder chest will be the best way to go in the long run. However, Dendrobite will certainly have its uses too. So that's your chess piece. In terms of weapons next, we have the Wasp Nest is a unique item that becomes very cheap once the market gets flooded with them, but might actually be quite rare on day one. This is a very solid claw. It's a throat stabber. 40 life gain for each enemy hit by attacks is amazing. It's got solid physical damage. It adds chaos damage once you've already landed 5 poisons on an enemy, and it just has great attack speed, great damage. This is a very solid claw. If you can get your hands on this without paying the earth for it, then use it. Alternately,